Welcome to another Flashback Friday episode of A Productive Conversation. I'm Mike Vardy, and this time around, we're revisiting a conversation from October of 2022 with Robin Hills. Now, since Robin's appearance on this podcast in October of 2022, he has continued to make significant strides in the field of emotional intelligence. In early 2023, he launched EI Matters, which is a digital magazine dedicated to sharing news, articles, podcasts, and more on emotional intelligence. And EI for Change has expanded its global reach as well. They now offer over 50 online courses on emotional intelligence with more than 500,000 learners across 200 countries. That's like 500,000. But that's not all. In recognition of his contributions, Robin Hills and EI for Change have received several accolades, and this includes Transformational Leaders of the Year by Excellion Magazine in 2023, Best Transformative Emotional Intelligence Coach of the Year in 2024 by the CIO Today, and Impact Company of the Year by .com Magazine in 2023. Not to mention that Robin was awarded an honorary doctorate in advanced studies in psychology in early 2024 for his extensive work in emotional intelligence training. Now, looking ahead, looks like EI for Change is developing new courses and exploring partnerships to highlight the relevance of emotional intelligence in the age of artificial intelligence, which is very important. You know, the emotional intelligence aspect in AI, I'm fascinated by that. I can't wait to see where they go with this. But their goal is to help individuals recognize and develop fundamental human skills such as empathy, understanding, and long-term thinking. These developments, well, they underscore Robin Hills' ongoing commitment to advancing emotional intelligence education and its practical applications in both personal and professional settings. So now you get to hear Robin talk about this stuff from about 2.5 years ago. So he's come a long way, as has his organization, and there's so much more for him to explore along with EI for Change. So without further ado, let's get into this conversation, this Flashback Friday conversation with Robin Hills. Enjoy. Robin, thanks so much for taking the time to join me on A Productive Conversation today.
I'm looking forward to it. Thank you for inviting me on your show, Mike.
So the book that I have in my hands right now is The Authority Guide to Emotional Resilience in Business. And I'm going to jump, whenever I have these conversations, I always kind of look at the first thing that catches my eye about it in the book itself. And I want to know where you get this from. So this is at the very end of the book. The paradox of resilience: at your worst times, you can become your best. Resilience is forged through adversity, not despite it. Is that Is that from you? Is that your quote?
No, I wish it was. I've really got to credit the lady that I pinched it from many years ago. She's a coach in the Liverpool area around where I live called Michelle Longney, and she put it up on a slide. Now, whether she made the quote up or not, I don't know, but that's where I got it from. And quite honestly, it actually captures everything there is about resilience.
And that's the thing that I really wanted to get into when the book came my way, and you sent a nice little note with it, which I really also appreciate, is the idea of the paradox of resilience. But resilience is often misunderstood. When I think about the term resilience, other words come to mind like perseverance, grit, things that maybe are related, but there's some conflation. It's like the difference between, say, preparation and planning, right? Like, I'm going to prepare this, I'm going to plan this. Like, they are cousins, but they don't mean the same thing. So can you kind of dive into when people are thinking about resiliency or this idea of resilience, what they might be getting either confused or just dead wrong about what it is, and maybe what it isn't?
Sure. Well, first of all, I'd just like to knock one of the great myths on its head with regards to resilience. Often when people talk about resilience, they talk about bouncing back. Well, you don't bounce when you are being resilient. You don't go back to how things were prior to an adverse event. You actually grow and develop and learn through resilience. I think we've got to look at where the word resilience came from. And about 40 or 50 years ago, the main use of the word resilience came from material science. It's stress over strain. And it's now become a metaphor for human behavior. And it's become so embedded into our psyche that everybody kind of drops the word resilience into conversations right, left, and center. So if you've been through an adverse event, suddenly you've got this magical component that is resilience. So you're right, it's not grit. There is a degree of perseverance there, but if I can summarize it very quickly, resilience is having a realistic optimism. It's having an understanding that you may be in a situation that you might not like, but it's around using your creativity and your innovation to try and work through the situation in an adaptable way to come out stronger at the other side. And the other thing is to focus in on your goals, to have some understanding that there is meaning to life. And if you focus on getting through, then that will help to develop your resilience. And you can't do it unless you've actually been through hard, trying times. So you don't know how resilient you're going to be until you get there.
And as soon as you're talking about this, I think of Viktor Frankl, right? Like Man's Search for Meaning. Like that's a name that immediately came to mind. But I also think that there's interesting thoughts around resilience that when the word really doesn't come up right out of the gate, like the obstacle is the way, Ryan Holiday's book, right? The idea of like there's a form of quote resiliency there that's happening. But do you think the term gets overused? Like, do you think that it's no?
All
Yeah,
the time.
like it's one of those.
Yes.
It just gets thrown around like so many other terms and words that does it lose its power as a result? Like, does it lose its meaning because it's so I wouldn't say corrupted, but just overused?
I think because of its overuse, we've got to watch for the poison in resilience, because people will actually use the word resilience when it's inappropriate. You need to be more resilient, is what some leaders will say to people when they complain about situations that they disagree with. Well, that is not being resilient. That is actually bringing to somebody's attention a situation that they don't like that could be managed more appropriately. And I think that we can look throughout modern history to see times when people have been called resilient or been labeled resilient, which is a nice way of saying, oh, I'm glad I wasn't in your situation. Put up, shut up, and get on with life. Oh, aren't you lucky? You're resilient. So we've just got to watch around the use of the word resilient.
When I was going through the beginnings of the book, I couldn't help but think about the things that we don't learn in school, things that maybe we should. We get taught things that maybe don't necessarily serve us as well as others down the road. We don't necessarily learn money management, like practical money management. We learn math, right? We don't learn time management. We don't learn anything around that, like some of those executive functioning skills. And I mean, again, I talked about this to you literally before we hop on the air, as both my kids are going back to school for the first day. My daughter going into grade 12, getting ready to think about life after school. She'll be 18 later, just a few months from now. And my son going into grade 7. So he's almost like he's in the middle of middle school, and they never really learn that stuff. And then, so as we're looking at what is resiliency, I get there and I'm like, why don't we learn? Like, is there a way to learn how to elevate it? Or is it just like you said, you have to go through something and it emerges? Like, is there a way to, other than obviously reading your book and kind of getting an understanding of tapping into some of the formulas and the frameworks, and there's a lot of them in here that you can use. Why isn't this something that we maybe either learn earlier on, or is it even something that we can learn and it just needs to be something that we kind of, it happens to a degree over time?
I think what we've got to do is to look at education in general and say that they're very good at following a curriculum. They're very good at stuffing us with information so that we can regurgitate it in an examination and come out with a certificate with certain grades on it, which really is a ticket onto the next phase of our learning, our growth. We are not taught this stuff at school because I think a lot of the people who are doing the teaching have just not got the capacity, the experience, and the understanding of how the business world works. A lot of the teachers, very good teachers, learn their art by coming out of university, going on to teacher training college, and then they're thrown in front of a class of school kids. So where have they got any resilience from? They learn it on the job. They have no business acumen whatsoever. And quite a few of them are very savvy and they pick it up really well. Quite a few of them aren't and really struggle with it. And there are certain things that a lot of people are taught at school, which I think we've just got to be very mindful of and knock some of these myths on the head. And one of them is around profitability as being a negative word. And that was how I viewed business when I went through my education, came out with a very, very poor understanding of making a profit. And it was as if it was being dirty. And another group of individuals which are very, very, very good at passing exams and are then thrown into the lion's den are clinicians, doctors. All they're good at doing is passing exams. That's how they get to become clinicians. What they do is they learn on the job, and some of them do it incredibly well, and some of them learn certain behavioral patterns that get them through. So, there is a place for all this stuff at school. We're just not there yet.
And that ties in nicely to the idea of coping versus resilience, because I think when, I think about teachers and especially, and I mean, in Canada, at least, nurses and things like that, where there's just so much going on, especially over the last few years, especially the medical field. And you address in the book the idea of coping versus resiliency. And I'd like you to touch on that, because one of the things that I've shared with people is, time happens to us, right? Like we go through our days and you cope with what you can't control, command what you can, right? Like, look at it that way as opposed to just going through the entire day just coping or trying to force something that can't be forced, right? So I'd like to hear about the relationship between coping and resiliency, and either where the crossover happens or where you've got to be careful that resiliency, like coping, just doesn't become a mechanism that you fall back on when, you need to push a bit more to get to those places where, hey, I'm a teacher and I'm going to teach about fixed mindset and growth mindset to my grade 4 kids, which a teacher did to my son. They talked about bubble brain and brick brain. I'm like, wow, like that's not in the curriculum, right? Like that's not there. And that's a push through or even a push back against what's there. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on, that relationship and the dynamic between coping and resiliency.
Experience one of the world's top universities on a young and dynamic campus. At the University of British Columbia's Okanagan campus, we bring worlds together to reveal new ways of thinking. Visit ok.ubc.ca to find out more.
Yes, I think coping, very simply, is putting up with stuff. So if you're able to put up with stuff, you're coping. Resilience is more than that, as I've already defined. It's actually working through creatively an adverse situation, putting yourself in control and saying, right, what is it that I can do to manage this more appropriately? You come out of the other end exhausted, worn and stressed, whether you're coping or whether you're being resilient and developing your resilience. But with coping, it's more of the same. Whereas with resilience, you're actually kind of chunking yourself up to the next level. And you're almost saying to yourself, well, you don't, but you're almost saying, bring it on, and you bring on the next phase to actually challenge yourself and grow through it. And just to jump back to your previous question, Mike, can resilience be developed? Yes, I think it certainly can be developed. We can learn what it is that we need to do in order to grow our resilience. The only thing we can control, And the only thing that we can change in any kind of adverse situation is ourselves, our thoughts, our feelings, our behaviors, our actions. These are the things under our control. So what is it that we need to do in order to make the best of the situation? We need to control our emotions. We need to control our impulses. We need to have that realistic optimism that I've talked about. We need to learn how to empathize with people, to build up our social networks. These are all things that are our internal protective factors that will help us as we learn to engage with the world in a better way. I've not used the word resilience.
No, I know,
but that's really what it is.
I'm going to, because we go back to the title of the book, Emotional Resilience in Business. When I looked at that, I mean, yes, we talked largely about resilience. You brought up the emotional component. And I think this comes up a lot, is emotions are so powerful, right, that they drive behavior in some, and you have to, it's not, and this is the thing, I think people, and I'm going to generalize here. We've thrown some generalizations out anyway, so I'm gonna go down that path a little bit. Is this idea that people, they go either one way or the other. Like, so for example, we could talk about, like, you've got to keep your emotions in check, and it's a lot easier to just go completely swing in the opposite direction than to find a nuance. So they're like, okay, well, I'm going to try to when it comes to controlling or commanding my emotions, I'm going to go so far in the other direction that there's a lack of humanity. Like, there's a humanness. And that's, I think that's the tricky part, is the nuance. And you bring up in the book, we get into the idea of the behaviors of resilience. And this is why the emotional part is so key to me, is the idea of the emotions that drain or impair resilience, and then the emotions that enhance or facilitate it. And when I saw that, I'm like, someone needs to pay attention to that part, because it's going to, it kind of, and again, it takes thoughtfulness and contemplation and a bit of a pause, which the world does not like us to do before, especially, and now it's trying to ramp back up. And man, I'm really trying to help people, like, no, it's okay. You don't have to get back up to the speed of light right now. That's where you'll miss stuff. So why was it important for you to address these? And I don't want to go into all the emotions. I want people to pick up the book. But why was it important for you to not only address the fact that these emotions play a role in how your resilience is developed and constructed, but also you drilled down to go, I need to create these distinctions so that someone reading this or exploring this can go, whoa, hold on, this is fear. I see that this is fear, or I see that this is, ambition or curiosity. Like, I'd like you to go into that, because I think I'm not sure that this may not have been the most, not tedious. Tedious is not the right word, but the most involved part of writing the book is to look at that part and go, okay, let me help with this nuance that will help people not go, okay, well, that's it. I'm going to shut down my emotions and go completely to logic. What you're trying to do here, from what I could gather, is bring people to that path of reason. Like, here's a way for you to have a reasoned approach to, these situations, so that your resiliency has a chance to thrive, as opposed to, die on the vine or not even make an appearance.
Sure. And I think what I'd like to do, Mark, is to knock another myth on the head. And this is one that makes my skin creep whenever I hear it. When people talk about positive and negative emotions, emotions are emotions. We can't put a label on them as to whether they're good or bad, black or white, right or wrong, or anything like that. What we've got to do is to look at emotions and look at the information that the emotion is communicating to us, and make a choice as to how we respond to it. So let's talk about an emotion that drains resilience. Let's talk about an emotion which is usually given the label negative, and that's fear that you've mentioned. If fear is such a negative emotion, why do we get such pleasure from horror movies and from going on roller coaster rides and putting ourselves under certain levels of risk? Fear is there to help us to make the right decisions. It helps to ensure that we make the best decisions. So if we're fearful of something, it gives us that opportunity to stop, think, react. So one of the positive emotions, if I can use that.
Let's just go with emotions, because you're right. It's funny, just real quick, is that you said stop, what was it? Stop, think, and react. We skip those two first steps on it when it comes to these. Like I'm afraid of fear. That's an oxymoron. That's a real you're right. It's a signal. So I think if we say like another, and I know you put it this way, like the drains, I think, so one that drains, let's say, or sorry, you want to go the other direction, which is one that enhances, right? Quote positive. Yeah. So let's go, because I think we can do we can dispel that myth. Let's do that in the context of this conversation, because I don't want people like, oh, well, this is a positive, negative. No, emotions are emotions, like you said.
Right. It's the behavior that is either positive or negative, or the action that is positive or negative, right, not the emotion itself. So if we look at one of those emotions that enhances resilience, the emotion of happiness, it's a very basic emotion that we all aspire towards, but it's a very short-lived emotion, and people forget that. You get little bursts of happiness every so often. And if happiness is such a positive emotion, we have this level of delirious bliss that somebody is under, and you just can't communicate with them. Hello, trees. Hello, grass. Hello, flowers. Oh, don't worry about it. It'll be all right. Just be happy. Yeah, great. But look, we're in a world of realism here. It's great to feel happy, and I enjoy those little bursts of happiness when they come my way. But what I'm striving for is not happiness. It's another enhancing emotion, and that's one of contentment. Are you content in your world currently? Because if you can strive towards that, you've got more resilience.
Middle isn't sexy, though. Content sounds like a middle. But it's sustainable, though. To be content, it's sustainable. And this goes back to the idea that I was saying, where people want you said good or bad, which is great. I'm a pro wrestling fan. So when I watch pro wrestling, there's a good guy and a bad guy. There's but you know who the most, but back in the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s, the most popular pro wrestler on the planet was Stone Cold Steve Austin. Why? Because he wasn't good or bad. He was supposed to be a bad guy, but he was going after his boss, and he was doing things that he was what they call a tweener. So he wasn't good or bad. He was just a wrestler. He was just doing, and everyone loved him because they could relate to him, because he was not pure good or pure evil. And again, people love absolutes. They love to go, okay, well, this is, to your point about happiness, if you don't experience sadness, you can't experience happiness, right? So I think everybody, after listening to this conversation, if you've not watched the movie Inside Out, the Pixar movie, go watch it, because Pixar movies are delightful in teaching lessons that to adults that we might have missed in other forms along the way. I'm kind of glad that, my daughter saw it just as she was getting, into that age where emotions started to wreak havoc on you, right? And that's the other thing too. Emotions can play a grand role in how we kind of move forward. But what's also interesting, and you bring this up in the book, this isn't just about an individual. This is about when you get into groups and organizations. So imagine if this is you just dealing with it on your own. Now you're getting a group of people together, all with different kind of approaches, upbringings, ideologies, things like that. How do you, as a leader, because we brought this up earlier, when someone who's in charge says you need to show more resiliency, and it kind of falls on deaf ears because it's it's kind of empty calories. What are some of the things, if you're leading an organization, or you're in a family maybe, or whatever, like you start to get groups of people together where you can foster some of that emotional resilience, and maybe either leverage it with those that are in the group, or does it just involve paying attention? Like where does this fall in? Because I think that's where it can get messy.
Well, it can, and I think paying attention is absolutely right. It's learning how to listen to people, but it's also, as a leader, understanding that you are responsible for setting the emotional climate within your team, within your organization. And I often speak to many senior leaders who talk about, oh, we want our people to be happy. Now, I'm not going to go down the route around what we've just talked about, but when I actually look into how they're working and reacting and behaving with their staff, they're instilling fear in them. They're angry all the time because they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. They're not doing what the leader wants. Well, how can people be happy when the leader is angry all the time or is creating an environment of fear? So the first thing that a leader needs to do is to understand how much of the emotional climate that they're responsible for, and to actually engage with people by listening to them and talking to them and finding out what motivates them. Now, I think the other important thing there is not to treat your team like a bunch of robots, but get to know them as people, because they are people and you don't know anything about them at all. Anything. You don't know anything about their internal or external protective factors of resilience, purely and simply because you haven't asked. You don't know what's going on in their family. You don't know what's going on with their friends. You don't know whether they're living in a house which is highly mortgaged, or whether they're renting, whether they're just about to be kicked out. You don't know what's in their bank account. You don't know the relationship they've got with their children. You don't know anything about their parents. You know nothing. So all you're doing is working with a group of people that have been forced together as a team, and you're all working together as a team to come to a common goal or a common output. Now, in many cases, it works incredibly well, but how much better would it work if you actually recognize the human side of the people that you're working with?
I was going to say, it's, we hear a lot like keep work at home, work at work and home at home. There's this Apple TV Plus series called Severance right now, which I'm getting into. Drives my wife nuts because she's like, really? You have to watch that? Like, oh no, I'm going to unpack this. But the idea is, for those who haven't, if you're listening right now, it's like, there's a severance, like a severed line between when you're at work and at home. You're two completely different lives. That's not the way the world works. And that's why I don't like the term work-life balance. Just drop the adjective. Just call it balance. And when you start to embrace that, then maybe that's where leaders can say, you know what? Just finding out about the people that I work with and alongside will help me better understand how to, navigate waters with them, as we, make our way through the workday, through the work week, through the life of our time together. And it just comes back to being human, right?
It does. It does. And also there's another myth that you've kindly dispelled for me, which is this idea of work-life balance. Again, it's another phrase that makes my skin creep every time I hear it. And the Chartered Institute of Professional Development, CIPD, here in the United Kingdom, will often talk about work-life balance. And you have keynote speeches at their annual conference where that's a title. So they're actually perpetuating this myth. Life is not on a fulcrum. Work is not on a fulcrum. Life at one end and work at the other. In our phases of our life, work takes up a major part of it. You can't split your life up into 8 hours sleeping, 8 hours at work, and 8 hours for me. It just doesn't work that way. And there are times when you actually have to work weekends late into the evening because that's what the work demands. And you can't suddenly say, oh no, it's 6 o'clock, I'll stop, if you've got an important meeting the next day that you haven't prepared for. So you've actually got to build that into other things that are going on in your life. And by the same token, it means that if you need to go to a hospital appointment or a dental appointment or any kind of health appointment during work time, you should be able to do that. And if you need to go and sort your kids out because something's going on at school, you will take that time. So, there is where the balance lies.
Yep. Ebb and flow.
You have to make the most appropriate decisions for yourself at that particular moment in time, and live with the consequences of what you do and the consequences of what you don't do.
Yeah, you'd think that, if we think back to, earlier times, no one was really thinking about, well, how's my work-life balance? Like the farmers aren't thinking that, or the cavemen certainly are. No one's really, but we put so much into that. And you're right. There's some instances like, and the way that myth, I think, gets perpetuated is either by changing it to like work-life integration or work-life harmony. I'm like, just drop the adjective, it's like you said, it's not on a fulcrum. But also the idea of it's much easier to do that because it's very, it's very quantitative. 8 hours here, 6 hours. There's an objective element to it, which requires less effort to consider. I'm done at 5, right? As opposed to, well, I'm done when I'm done. That's why I think, I'm a night owl. I do a lot of my work later in the day after the kids are in bed. That would not be allowed in most work environments. But when remote work started to take hold, it was. And now all of a sudden that remote work there's kind of a pushback to get people back in. There's those people that were better in the evenings. They're like, oh, I'd like to stay and keep doing this. They're like, no, you need to be back here because this is the way we do things. I think some of the things, like you said, that if we started to measure or, measure or at least manage the right things, not time, not, not this quantitative stuff, but maybe more things like expectations, attention, things that and we're seeing more of this as we record this right now, this idea of the quiet quitting movement, which people are saying, oh, it's such a new phenomenon. It's not a new phenomenon. People have been, and in all honesty, I've written about it. You've probably read about it. Go look more. It's getting a lot more play probably than it needs to. But ultimately, what it should be about is expectations. Hey, this is my expectation of you as an employee. This is my expectation of you. Like understanding, communication, things that are nuanced and maybe more qualitative. If we started measuring those things more than say, hey, I got my email inbox to 0 today. It was a productive day. Would resilience have a greater chance to thrive? Or better still, would we even need to tap into it as much because the right things are being, quote, measured or at least being used as a measuring stick for how we're going through situations?
I think you're right. If a leader is to say to the members of the team, this is the expectation, this is the outputs that we can agree on, and these are the outputs that we can agree on, and then allow the team to decide amongst themselves how they're going to deliver against that expectation, then you will get a much better outcome. Because if people want to do it at 10 o'clock at night, at 4 o'clock in the morning, that's their choice. So it's up to them to determine when they do it. It's up to them to agree with the leaders as to what it's going to look like when you get to that endpoint. But the leader then has to allow the team to do it in their own way. So if he sees the team talking by the coffee machine for 3 hours on an afternoon instead of getting on with their work, let them do it. It's their responsibility to make sure that they deliver.
There's
if they don't deliver,
there's empowerment there. If you give the empowerment, you got to give it. And to your point, and again, this ties into what I just asked. I think when people have more agency, they don't need to, I wouldn't say they don't need to, quote, worry about resiliency, but maybe, and again, I'll ask you, because you've studied this for a long time, with more agency given, what does that mean for emotional resilience? What does that mean for adversity? I don't think in my thoughts are, those moments are maybe fewer and further between, or maybe the maybe we misjudge levels. And so if adversity is, we make mountains out of molehills in other situations instead because we're human beings. Like, what do you think that looks like?
Well, I think we're under a lot of time pressure. I mean, even as I'm speaking to you, Mike, and thoroughly enjoying the conversation, to a certain extent, we're watching the
me
clock,
too.
aren't we?
Oh, yeah. We're almost done.
To keep within a defined period of time. So I think time creates a great pressure for us all. We actually agree that we're going to do something within a defined period of time. And more often than not, we're a lot more generous with what we say we can do in that period of time than what we actually are. And so we try and stuff things into that. And the other thing that we do is we take on more and more, because a lot of us find it very difficult to say no to people, which actually adds to our pressures. So a lot of it is actually learning levels of assertiveness to say, no, I can't do it. Or, no, I can't do it within that period of time. You asked for it within a week. Let me deliver it to you in 2 weeks, because I know it's going to take me longer than a week to do it. I know you're under a lot of pressure. That's your issue. Don't put your pressure onto me, so I don't take other people's urgency. And I think that's an important point. If somebody comes to me with an urgent email, this needs to be done by Friday. Why? If it needs to be done by Friday, why didn't you speak to me earlier about it? It's now become your issue, and it's not my issue. And it can be very hard to say that to a manager, but you have to say it once or twice for the manager to actually understand that you're taking control of yourself, you're taking control of your work, you're actually looking at your own level of productivity, and you will be a better employee, a better follower, a better person who is being led because of it, not despite it. Back to the paradox, a different one.
And we'll leave it at that. The book is called The Authority Guide to Emotional Resilience in Business. Robin, where can people pick up this book and keep up with what you're doing?
Well, seeing as we're speaking to a global audience, Mike, I've got to be realistic. You're not going to find it in your local bookshop. Amazon have got a great stock of it, and there are some great reviews on Amazon, amazon.com, where I am, amazon.co.uk. Go and have a look for it on Amazon. My name's Robin Hills, and Mike's given you the name of the book many times, The Authority Guide to Emotional Resilience in Business. Search for it and you'll find it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of A Productive Conversation. If you want to get all of the relevant show notes and check out my website in the process, go to mikevardy.com/podcast584. You can make that happen. You can also check out the show notes wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and then subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss a single episode of what's to come. Not just these Flashback Friday episodes, but fresh, shiny, new episodes every week, including our regular monthly series, PM Talks, which I'm excited to bring to you in just a couple of weeks from now. We've already mapped out all of season 2 for that, for myself and Patrick Rowan to chat about things that are related to productiveness and managing one's relationship with time. So I encourage you to subscribe to the show. It's one way to support the show. Another is to check out the sponsors that you heard during the conversation today. Go to mikevardy.com/podcast sponsors. Click on any of the sponsors links that resonate with you, and that way they know that we sent you. And that's it for this episode. Until next time, I'm Mike Vardy, the host of A Productive Conversation, reminding you to stop doing productive and start being productive. See you later.